Last year, when the pandemic began wreaking havoc across the world, China was busy covering its tracks. It constructed its own version of events, an alternative version of history, where the Chinese state bore no responsibility for its criminal negligence. 18 months on, a scientist has found clinching proof of China's cover-up. At the peak of the pandemic, when the world was struggling to understand this virus, Chinese researchers deleted more than 200 virus samples from a public database hosted by the United States. And this included samples from the early cases in Wuhan. So why did China delete these samples from Wuhan? What was China trying to hide? What did these samples contain? And why did America allow these Chinese scientists to delete them? We'll answer all these questions in the next 4 minutes. I'll start from the beginning. In March 2020, when the outbreak began in Wuhan, a study was published in China. And the study came with a spreadsheet. It had information about 241 genetic sequences collected by scientists at the Wuhan University. All this information was uploaded on an online database. It is called the Sequence Read Archive. It is managed by the US government's National Library of Medicine. And that's a wing of the National Institutes of Health, or NIH. So what is this archive? Well, think of it as a massive online database where scientists from all over the world can upload their findings about new viruses. So just like everyone else, some Chinese researchers also uploaded their research here. Reports say all of this happened in March 2020. But a few months later, in the month of June last year, the scientists behind this Wuhan research came online and filed a request. They wanted the database of 241 samples from Wuhan to be deleted. What was the reason? Apparently, the scientists wanted to submit all of these findings to another database, and this was confirmed by the NIH in a statement today. Now, here's something that you should know. Researchers who submit their data to the server own the rights to their research. So they can request the withdrawal or the deletion of the data that they have uploaded. And here was a scientist from China requesting that his or her data be deleted so that they can upload it again in another database. It sounded like a harmless request. It was granted. But then an American scientist began digging, probing into what was actually inside these Chinese research papers. What was this data? What did these samples say? Let me first tell you who this scientist is. His name is Dr. Jess Bloom. He's a biologist from Seattle, one of the 18 scientists who recently wrote a letter in the journal Science asking for a new investigation into the origins of the pandemic. Now, Dr. Bloom has been researching the Wuhan virus himself. Earlier this month, he tried to look for Chinese research on the American database, the same one that we spoke to you about. And he found that this Chinese research was deleted. So he began an investigation, and this is what he found. These Wuhan samples were collected by a Chinese scientist named I.C. Fu. This was at the Renmin Hospital in Wuhan. The same name also came up in another study online that described an experimental test for the Wuhan virus. And this is where things get interesting. Apparently, the research that was uploaded to the American database earlier had the samples of the Wuhan virus. These samples were collected through nasal swabs from early patients in Wuhan, and then these samples were removed. What does this tell you? Chinese researchers removed early records of the Wuhan virus. But here's the thing about the internet. Once you upload something on the World Wide Web, chances are it will stay there forever in some form or the other. It is very difficult to wipe it off completely. So through his research on the internet, Dr. Bloom managed to find 13 out of the 241 original samples that China had deleted. And he has now published a paper. It says Chinese researchers had published sequences from samples collected from Wuhan in January and February of 2020, and that the deletion of samples was suspicious. And I have some quotes from what he has said. Allow me to read from his paper. He says there is no plausible scientific reason for the deletion. There are no corrections to the paper. The paper states human subjects' approval was obtained. It therefore seems likely that sequences were deleted to obscure their existence, particularly in light of the directive that labs destroy early samples and multiple orders requiring approval of publications on COVID-19. Let me explain what he's saying. Chinese officials, remember, had allegedly ordered the destruction of early samples. Beijing was tightly monitoring all the research that came out of China. And that's perhaps the only reason why the samples from Wuhan were taken down. These revelations don't tell us anything about the origins of the virus. They do not settle the debate on whether the virus was natural or man-made, but they reconfirm China's culpability. China went out of its way to scrub all evidence. What explains this effort to hide all samples and destroy all research? China lied and people died. That's what it tells you. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.